Elation and jubilation gamers from all around the world. I am Luchan and this is the World Gamer Show. And today I have a very special guest here with me, Brett Douville, game developer with an incredible career that had a huge impact on some of the best games ever made, such as Skyrim, Fallout 3 and 4, and even cult classics from the Star Wars universe like Republic Commando and StarFighter. But also some neat surprises that we will find out along the way. So thank you very much for being here, Brett, and welcome.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, me and Brett already met once in Galway, in Ireland, in 2017 at the Galway Gaming Gathering.
Yes.
And really, Brett, you've been the sweetest guy, and you even signed my copy of Fallout 4, so
I did.
Of course I wanted you on my channel. So thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. And so I've gathered some notes to help me out because, boy, do I have questions for you today. I'd say let's dive right in if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while, so it's there's a lot of questions probably to ask.
Yes, I have. So, but first let's start, with you, the man behind the games. So indeed, you have quite a career from Bethesda to LucasArts and many others, and you've worked in the biggest and best companies. But we will touch on some of your most well-known games you worked on, like Skyrim and Fallout, later on. First, I'd like to know how you started in the gaming industry, and did you always have a clear idea in your mind of what you wanted to become, if you wanted to become a developer, or maybe you wanted to become an astronaut as a kid?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I never imagined a career in games when I was growing up. I mean, when I was growing up, there were computer games, but I mean, I was growing up in the early 1980s, and computer games were kind of foreign to me. I played them on the Apple II. I was a programmer from a young age. I started when I was like 9 or 10. That was just as a result of being a little bit lucky at school. They had introduced Apple IIs to my, elementary school. And my father was a programmer before me. He did sort of work in databases and payroll and things like that, stuff in business-oriented applications for defense contractor in New Hampshire, where I grew up. Anyway, I really didn't think of games as being, like a lot of us, we don't really think about how things are made necessarily, and I certainly didn't think about games as being made by people. I was more aware of like writers, write books and things like that. People make movies, but games were just kind of magical and they just kind of dropped out of the sky. And I never really connected what I did to, what I was playing on the computers. The first games I played were actually on mainframes, and those were actually generally free. They were distributed through the old ARPANET or something like that. And so, my father and I would play, on his server, on his mainframe from home. And I just really never connected that there was a person behind making that. So growing up, I didn't have a lot of specific interest in that. And in fact, in high school and college, I was playing a lot fewer games. I didn't have consoles growing up. I only ever had a computer. I had a Macintosh when I went away to college, which was not a real hot gaming machine, although it did have Tetris, and I played an awful lot of that. But I didn't have a PC again really until graduate school, I guess. And that was the time at which I started thinking, getting back into computers. Before that, I had been interested in being a writer. I had been interested in being in academia. I as an undergraduate, I studied physics and philosophy, so I was kind of all over the place. But that math background, that physics background gave me a good grounding, plus I had a history of programming. So I switched to computer science and did, 4 or 5 years in graduate school, and then I decided sticking around in graduate school wasn't really for me, and I looked at what was out there. And in the meantime, video games had become a real business, and it wasn't just one person writing a game in their, garage or whatever, or bedroom or what have you. There were companies that were making these games, and I'd kind of been playing them for a few years at that point on PCs. So that was the time when I decided to consider getting into games. My first job was at LucasArts.
Nice. And what do you love more about being a developer, and maybe what not so much? Do you like the creative process, or are you more of a technical guy?
I think the thing I enjoy most is the collaboration. I really enjoy working with people who are of different disciplines. I think of tech as primarily a service-oriented, group in games. We're there to serve designs needs, artists needs. There are some games which are more technology forward, but I haven't tended to work on games that are very technology forward. Where it's some new technology that hasn't been invented yet. It's been invented for this game. It's really what I mean. I've never been that kind of technical visionary. What I'm really interested in is making sure that, I become what we call a force multiplier on the whole team. If the engineering is going smoothly, the tools work fast and are stable, then the rest of the team can do their best work. And we try to be really, really responsive, and open up as much as possible the ability for other developers to do their jobs.
Right. And I mean, really, your passion for video games transpires clearly. I've seen your YouTube channel in which you've done some playthrough of your games, the games you've created along with your team. But even more so, on your podcast, the Dev Game Club, and which you should definitely check it out. It will blow your mind. I will put the link in the description. And you've got a ton of guests yourself there, and tackle incredibly interesting topics on gaming development. It's truly fascinating. Tell us a little bit about how it started and what made you start this journey.
Like I said, it was something that I had done as a kid. I mean, I really enjoyed programming, but sometimes the things we do when we're young are just kind of part of us, and we don't really think of them as work. It's just, I mean, I still sometimes I'm kind of blown away by the fact that I get to program a significant part of every day. So I think that when I was sort of a little disenchanted with academia, in engineering, a lot of that is funded by government money, defense money, to be more explicit, in the United States. And particularly how that was structured, I was just a little frustrated with. So I was kind of thinking about, well, what else could I do? One of the other things I considered was, at that point, Pixar was only a couple of years out from Toy Story. So I considered that. I had some friends who had gone there, or colleagues, fellow students. Same with DreamWorks Animation. I had somebody who ended up there. And did really, really well. So I considered that too as a potential career. But over the few years that I was in graduate school, I had been playing a lot of games, both board and card games, and computer games, and especially a lot of Quake, Diablo, Doom, a lot of Doom and Doom 2, both single player and multiplayer, and had just kind of went, oh wow, this is a whole new industry now. I mean, this is a big thing to get in, on the ground floor. Computer animation would have been the same as far as films go. And so that was really exciting. And I looked around at some of the games I really enjoyed that were story-based. And those were, typically games like, Full Throttle, or earlier titles from LucasArts, and so I just kind of applied there out of the blue. I wasn't going there specifically for Star Wars, but I was particularly interested in Tim Schafer's work, and so I had kind of reached out to him because I was traveling to the Bay Area to talk with somebody else, some other company, about potentially getting into games. So that's kind of how it happened. I ended up going.
What about the Dev Game Club? How did that start?
Oh, how did that start? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I guess I misunderstood the focus of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I still got more details out of the previous question, so that's fantastic for me. I landed on my feet.
So so I don't know, around about 2013 or 14, podcasts had been around a while already, but my friend Tim Longo had asked me and Jamie Frischram, we were just having a conversation via email And he asked if there were any podcasts that were like, book clubs for games. And, and there probably were a few at the time. I'm thinking particular, I guess it was Retro Game Club or something like that. That was something that Tim listened to. But there weren't any with a sort of developer spin, that were for developers by developers, for fans as well. But I mean, it's kind of the opportunity to look at it from a developer's lens and sort of talk about what we saw in the games or what inspired us from the games. And then it just took, as it normally does with Tim, the idea, to actually us implementing. I said, okay, yeah, we could go and do that. And it took a few years before we actually got around to starting it.
Thank you very much for nice insight. I think in a way it feels like seeing the code in the matrix for you developer guys, right?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. I mean, we tend to play games that we've enjoyed in the past, and might have been inspirational to us, either while we were in games or before, so playing something like Diablo or Doom, both of which we played, were games that we were also lucky enough to get interviews for with Dave Brevik and with John Romero. So, not only did we get to sort of look at them and talk about how they impacted our career or the industry. I mean, those were games that had huge impacts. We also got a chance to sort of fanboy out, with the creator. So that's kind of nice. We're game developers, but we're also fans, of a lot of games. So it's, we play games. We play games for the cast. We play other games. So, we're still gamers.
Of course. And now I'd say let's move a little bit towards one of your biggest games, Skyrim. So Skyrim, a game so good that it basically became a meme, like GTA 5 for how many systems it got released for.
Yeah, I know, it's
right?
On refrigerators
Even
now,
on
right?
fridge,
Toasters.
So what was your role in that game? What memories do you have of those times? And maybe what was it like to work at Bethesda?
Sure. I mean, I went there in 2008 to help finish out Fallout 3, and then while I was there, Todd Howard had told me that he was hiring me to think of me as a lead, kind of moving forward. But Fallout 3 was almost done by the time I got there. We only had maybe 6 months left or something like that. So I basically helped close that one out. For Skyrim, my biggest role was to take, we did a sort of post-mortem on Fallout 3. Just like let whole teams talk about what was working, what wasn't working, and where the biggest hiccups were, what were the things that slowed them down the most. And I took a lot of that feedback to the systems group, which was I was the lead systems programmer, which meant sort of a lot of low-level systems that were used by other parts of the game. So that's things like resource management. So you have to bring art in before you put it on the screen. You have to take it off the disk, or have to take a hard disk or a Blu-ray or whatever, the scripting language. We weren't supporting the scripts themselves. That there were gameplay people who would help with that, but we wrote the scripting system, the animation system, audio, things like that, the build systems and the exporters and some of the tools. And so I was in charge of all of that, and I kind of looked at, because I didn't have a long history with the team at that point, I didn't really know where the pain points were in developing games of that size. And there were a couple of things. One was the tools weren't always stable. The editor wasn't always super stable. So that was a number one focus. And the animation system was very outdated and overly expensive for what it gave us. So those were a couple of really big things that we tackled right away to change and replace. To fix. And it was kind of my job to set those priorities, over the course of, roughly, 2.5 to 3 years of development.
Great. And so basically, you've directed the whole process of making Skyrim. So you've seen the whole thing, unlike, for example, Fallout 3
right.
And possibly 4. So how would you say that, how did Skyrim change through the years? Was the Dragonborn always a thing? do you have any discarded concept that you can share with us that you would have liked to include, but maybe you couldn't for time constraints or budget or technical limitations or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's anything we took out for things like budget or time constraints. There were more, they weren't showing the fun necessarily. I mean, one of the things, I can remember Todd talking about publicly was there was an economy system, where you would go, for example, Riverwood, I think, is the first town, after character generation. Well, the river had like a little economy of like, well, they were woodcutters and maybe something else, and they have store there. And the idea was that the civil war that was going on might impact that through your actions. So you'd go and you'd be like, oh, well, I'll help whatever, one of the factions, do a raid on Riverwood. But the problem is that would tend to make Riverwood less available to the player, right? And you want to be able to just like go sell your stuff whenever you want to sell your stuff. If there's a trainer someplace, you want to be able to go and train regardless of, whether you have a good reputation in that place or not. And, one of the things that can be really frustrating is, on top of, the fact that the games kind of take place in real quote unquote real time and day night and all of that stuff, and all the AI have their schedules, so the shop might be closed because you're there at night. But it's even worse if the shop's just never going to open again. And so what we found that was not only kind of hard to balance, but also just put a lot of barriers in front of the player. And a lot of the process of Skyrim was removing barriers. We knew it was going to be a really, really rocky, kind of craggy place, very mountainous, but we spent a lot of time just smoothing down the traversal of those spaces so that you could just kind of run up and over a hill. I can remember in the first, 6 months or a year, you'd be walking through spaces and you'd just be constantly getting kind of caught up on rocks and whatever trees, etc. And the environmental artist team spent a lot of time, really kind of fine-tuning that to make it really, really smooth to move around. So the Civil War was something that kind of faded to the background. The dragons are something that really came to the foreground because Dave D'Angelo and others, that were working on that did a really, really good job of finding a way to make that systemic, to make it fit in everywhere. Originally the thinking had been, of course, I guess Alduin, the big, big bad dragon. Well, that would be its own thing, but all the other dragons, not necessarily. It might have been a lot less. But that group really took to heart making the dragons a real part of the experience, and it really, really paid off. That's true of a lot of Skyrim. I think, if I can plug my friend Jonah Loeb, who was an artist on the game, who's a character artist, he modeled Alduin. He modeled the giants, some other things. He had been there since the Isles, the Shivering Isles for Oblivion. And, so a lot of his creature and monster concepts are in the games. And he's actually done a YouTube, hour-long documentary where he talks to a lot of the sort of creative people who kind of were just kind of coming into their own on that project. Some of them have been around since Fallout 3. Jonah had gone back to, Oblivion, but a lot of them were newer, and there's just a lot of energy in that group to really, really make it an experience that really, really sang. Yeah, those are some things I can sort of think of that changed, but Jonah's video would be really good to look at too, because he talks a lot about the development. I don't think I did see it
yet, but if I find it, I will certainly watch it and
definitely
put the link in the description so that everybody can look at it.
Yeah, definitely check it out. He talks with tons of people. I think there's eight or nine people who are part of that. Most of whom have moved on. All of them have moved on from Skyrim, from Bethesda.
Well, I'm certainly glad that the game turned out how it did, especially about the first village. For being a first settlement, it's very important that it allows you to have at least a little bit of freedom to grasp the mechanics, how it goes, So definitely well done, not just in there, but with everything. In fact, it's matched every record of sales, so it's safe to say it's a job well done. But
Yeah,
now I'd
we
say
were really pleased with it. Yeah.
let's move to another job well done, Fallout.
Hmm.
4 and 3, but let's start with 4, at least for now, because you also worked on that game. So what was your role there, and was it hard to work on the sequel of one of the most influential games ever, that was Fallout 3?
Yeah. So yeah, I was the lead programmer on that for a year and a half to 2 years. I'm trying to remember the timeline, but around that amount. I mean, basically after Skyrim till September of 2013. So I took over all of the engineers for that project. There was so that included gameplay, the tools, and a few other. The graphics department had its. I mean, there were leads in some of these groups, but mostly people reported directly to me, which was maybe too much, honestly. That's a lot of. I had maybe 25 to 30 programmers, depending, who were reporting to me, which is just a lot, to be honest. But yeah, so one of the things that we thought about a lot was how to, Istvan Pelli, who's the lead artist on that, he's the lead artist for the franchise. He spent a lot of time figuring out the new look. We were challenging, we're rewriting the renderer. Even though we had done a rewrite for Skyrim, we were further rewriting it. That was a challenge that was coming. So there were challenges like that. There was also one of the big things that happens with any Bethesda game is that the world is such a big part of their appeal that there's a lot of figuring out how, does it feel to move through that space. And we also were doing, motion capture, I guess, for some of the critical scenes for the first time, facial animation capture and things like that. When that was new for us, we had really overhauled the face system for Skyrim, but then taking that the next step to further improve it into Fallout 4 was the thing that was going on. And then, of course, we were trying to find a way to let players basically edit the game in those settlements. That wasn't fully out of pre-production, I think, when I left, but it was getting close. So I saw it kind of in its early days. I haven't gone back to play that game. I didn't play it after it came out. And one of the reasons is that we always start with basically character generation, and the first experience after that, we don't really start with car gen. We really start with, okay, after you leave character generation, then what would you do? And you go out, you go into that little place, that little town where, you had started the game, and then you would go down into, I guess, Concord or something. I can't remember the names of the places because it's been 10 years, but, and then you would go down there and you meet the Deathclaw and you get the power armor and all of that stuff. I guess the power armor is another thing that was a big part of the game that we had done a lot of pre-pro on. I have played that experience. I never played it after it shipped, but I played it hundreds of times before it shipped, and so it's really, really hard to go back. So sometimes it's hard to remember, because what was in the game and what wasn't in the game. But those are some of the big things.
Save file of the post game, basically.
Yeah.
So that you can finally skip the early parts.
No kidding. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I would need something like that. I don't know. Maybe I'll get far enough away from it someday. Because I really loved Fallout 3. Coming in very late, the game was basically finished, in a lot of ways. There's lots of polish and bugs to fix and things like that. That's what we were doing, performance to improve. But coming in so late, I kind of, had the opportunity to kind of just get in and play it a lot. That's what Todd wanted me to do, was just play this a whole bunch. Have you played the other games? Tell me what you think, and I was like, sure, it's not Fallout 2D, but man, it's very Fallout. It really felt that way to me, and that was kind of the big thing to keep going in Fallout 4. It was the most important thing. It was to try to find some new areas to explore more. The power armor was a big part of that. The settlements, were a big part of that. More customization and options for the player. And then I guess the other thing was to, and this I wouldn't have been involved with much at all at the time, but with some of the factional stuff. I think there's basically 4 factions, and you're kind of negotiating your relationship with those. So I think those were kind of the big things that were changing.
Right, and it was also the first Fallout for the newer machines.
Correct.
because
Yeah.
Fallout
Yeah, we
3
were
was
also
on
porting.
360
Yeah, we were
and
also
PS3.
porting to a new generation. Yep, that's right.
So-
Yep.
While
Yeah, for sure.
Skyrim was cross-gen.
Yes.
It was the first
Well,
full
Skyrim
on
was
the
not.
new-
Skyrim was full on the previous generation, and then was quickly ported because it was fairly easy to port forward, fairly easy. And then, but we originally started Fallout 4 keeping the previous machines in mind. So the PS3 and the Xbox 360, where originally we're going to support, and that was a real challenge. Now that you mention it, because it was any console generation jump is a big one. It's easy to move forward, but it's hard to maintain, starting with a target of the new generation to maintain the old generation. Kept that up for a while, but I think by the time I left, they were talking about dropping it, or maybe we had already decided not to support the PS3 and the 360.
I think it was the right decision. And I think that another thing that was at least expanded on is the companion, and especially my favorite, Dogmeat.
Dogmeat.
Who has a much more prominent role compared
That's
to
true, yeah.
previous games. So I'm a pet person myself, so I obviously loved it, and I was too afraid that he would get hurt, so I wasn't even using him so much, but it really got me anxious at some point. So my question is, whose idea was it, and are you a dog or even a pet person yourself?
I mean, I don't have pets now because I like to be able to travel. And as a divorced dad, my kids are grown. Like I can travel pretty easily, but that's less easy if you have a pet around. So the real genesis of that was Joel Burgess, who had a German Shepherd called River. Sadly, River died maybe 3 years ago. Joel brought River into the office. We did mocap with River. He introduced River, to a lot of the team. So Dogmeat, in the game really is River in a lot of ways. The name comes from the original game. There was a Dogmeat in the original game, and before that, it was in a movie called A Boy and His Dog, which is a kind of a cult science fiction movie with Don Johnson, who had a telepathic German Shepherd. I think it was a German Shepherd. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, he was in Fallout, the previous Fallout games. So yeah, it really came from Joel. Joel was the lead level designer on Fallout 4, and he really was pushing forward that feature and worked a lot with Jean Simonet, who had worked for me in the systems group, who did all the pathing stuff to kind of really make his animation come alive and make him navigate the world in a believable way. And a lot of that stuff was really well developed by the time I left.
Okay, nice. Speaking of the previous Fallout, did you play any of the games before?
I did.
Which one is your
1 and
favorite?
2. I played both 1 and 2. I think I would say I prefer 1 just because it's manageable size. 2 is very, very large. And in fact, I'm not sure I've ever finished 2. I remember playing to a certain point where I couldn't get in. There was some major town. I don't remember the details because it's quite a while ago now. But I got to this place where you needed a utility object, a utility tool or something to open the sewer grate to get in, and I had sold that utility tool, for bottle caps at some point, and so I couldn't get through that point, and I was really frustrated, and I didn't have whatever other skills I would need to get in, and I kind of got a little stymied, and then I played it again some years later, having forgotten that, and then did exactly the same thing, and I said, you know what, this game I probably just won't ever finish.
It's so hard to go back to these games after some time.
Sometimes we played the original Fallout for the podcast for Dev Game Club, and we talked to I'm gonna forget their names. We talked to nope, it's gone. I don't have it right now, but day after Thanksgiving here. But we talked to the two sort of the lead programmer and the lead artist, and it was a great conversation. It was really, really fun to kind of go back to. And I find that game very manageable, but Fallout 2 is much bigger, and a little bit, there's so many things to chase. And I'm also a completist, like when I play games, I like to get everything, and that's really, really hard with some of those older RPGs. So, it's just hard for my brain, even though those are games that I loved, all of those, sort of the era of the Infinity Engine, even though Fallout was not that heavy.
The Elder Scrolls also has this problem in which the 2D games are like outrageously bigger than the newer ones. So
Yeah,
because I
the
think
oldest games.
because of the fact that they were 2D, it was maybe, I don't know, easier to make them expand the world beyond,
But they leaned a lot more into procedural generation, I think, in the
Right.
oldest titles, right? And so, and they felt really a lot emptier, but this is kind of dialed in to be the right size now, I think, in terms of how big the worlds are.
Yeah. So, let's change gears a little bit. So even before Fallout 3, you've worked on quite some Star Wars games like Republic Commando specifically and StarFighter. Correct me if I'm wrong if there are more.
And Jedi StarFighter, which was the sequel.
Right. And were you already a Star Wars fan when you joined LucasArts, or did you join more because you liked all the classic point-and-clicks adventure games like Monkey Island,
Yeah, I joined more because I enjoyed the history of the point and clicks. Although I did like both Star Wars and Star Trek growing up. I mean, Star Trek was on TV every day or whatever, once a week. I don't remember, but and I had seen Star Wars in the theater in 1977. We were at the beach, and my father took me and at least one of my sisters to see it. We were very young. I mean, I was in fact, that first time I saw it, I think I fell asleep. But it was like a rainy day at the beach, and we decided to go see a movie instead and cool off a little bit. And but I had seen Star Wars quite a lot. I remember being blown away, by Empire when that was out. By the surprise at the end, and I don't want to spoil it, in case anybody's not seen Empire Strikes Back. But it was a big deal. I was super excited to see, Return of the Jedi, which, I remember seeing as well in the theater. So yeah, I mean, I was a fan of those, but I wasn't going there because it was, the Star Wars company. In fact, up until that point, there weren't a lot of Star Wars games made by LucasArts. It was really because of the prequels that it kind of got into high gear. There was a sort of mandate from the ranch, from Lucasfilm Ranch, Skywalker Ranch, which was where George did his work, that we would make, we're going to have this, we need a pod racing game, we need a game with the spaceship, we need play the movie game, and there was kind of this, like, we have to do that. And then that kind of opened up the gates for Star Wars. I mean, it had started 5 or 6 years before with things like Dark Forces, and then the Jedi Knight and things like that, but it really kind of got going in earnest when I got there, and as LucasArts made the transition to 3D. So I originally, like I said, kind of went there. Tim Schafer was working on Grim Fandango at the time. I was really excited about that game. But by the time I interviewed there, he had his whole team and was about to go into, the last kind of phases of development. They were in full production. And when I was there, I interviewed with Darren Stinnett, who had made Dark Forces, and he and I hit it off pretty well, and he ended up hiring me to do the AI and the gameplay programming for StarFighter.
Nice.
I've got a standee there in the background.
I could say my eyes lay straight on that.
Yeah. I've got a Skyrim special edition back over that shoulder too, but
that is a little bit too tiny for
it's a little smaller.
Yeah, eyes,
this is kind of a long room, so
all the way back.
Yeah.
And personally, I personally am a big fan of Republic Commando, and I've even devoured the fantastic making of videos. And in one of them, it was very peculiar because they show that you actually received training as soldier by real expert, by real soldiers or ex-marine or whatnot. Did you actually get to participate in those training sessions? Because you weren't there in the making of videos.
No, I actually wasn't on the project at the beginning. They needed help on Full Throttle 2. They needed, gameplay engineers and things like that. And, I had done StarFighter, and then I was the lead programmer on Jedi StarFighter, which was kind of, if it had been a PC game, primarily, it would have been basically an expansion pack. But it was another full kind of game. And the idea was to kind of get something more out of that engine, which we had spent a lot of money on to build, because it was built from scratch. So I was working anyway on Full Throttle 2, and that project ran into trouble. I mean, it was basically way too expensive. They kind of didn't do enough pre-production, and so they were still figuring things out. And they ended up needing me back over in Republic Commando. So I wasn't there at the very beginning when they started figuring things out like that. I think in those videos you see mostly a lot of the animators, who really had to understand how they were going to move. And I don't know if any programmers are in those shots. I haven't watched those videos in a long time. I know Darren would have been there. He was the project leader at the time. He would later become the executive producer, and Chris Williams would become the project lead. And then, I'm sure Tim was there as well, and I don't remember if he's in any of the videos either. Tim Longo was the creative director, my co-host on the podcast. So I wasn't there, but I do definitely remember, watching that and hearing tales of them, being trained and talking about how you move, as a team, in those environments. We call them squads usually in the games, but I was informed when I showed the game at E3, we had a Marine who kept coming back again and again to play, and he would say, 4 men is a team, a squad is whatever, 5 teams or something like that. He was very you can't call it a squad. I was like, well, in Star Wars it's a squad, but
Nice.
But I'm not going to tell a Marine that, because
hands up.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. This is very nice, previous stuff, I'd say. In the same making of videos, it said that George Lucas himself is the one that gave the idea to give different colors to the commandos, and indeed you can see that the in-development footage shows that originally they were basically all white, just like the regular, clones. And George Lucas is actually a little infamous for being so very protective with the Star Wars franchise, or at least he was, good old times.
Back when he still owned it, yeah.
So I was wondering, was this true also for the games you worked on, such as Republic Commando, StarFighter, Jedi, and whatnot? Did he sort of get in the way much? Did you have to push for many things? How much of his influence is there in the game?
He hadn't really been involved in other games at LucasArts that much. He kind of wanted the company to not, to make a little money, and it was kind of go figure out, how games are, how stories are told in games. That's why they started out as storytelling, and partly why they didn't have any Star Wars games for so long. I think Dark Forces was the first one that was done by LucasArts. Anyway, so that was actually the first one, and my recollection is that was actually the involvement of the president at the time, who wanted to get licensing and George Lucas more involved with the company, because George is a great storyteller, and let's try to bring him in and make him more aware. I mean, the game had originally started taking place all on one day on Geonosis. That was the original high concept pitch, was they're clones. It's one day, and in this war, from the movie. And it kind of, talking with marketing and things like that, that was a hard thing to sell at the time. You normally want multiple environments, and it's the whole marketing question to figure out there. So we kind of ditched that pretty quick. But having the clones be clones, and in fact, they had, they weren't all voiced by Tamura Morrison originally, but there were Tamura Morrison and then 3 sound-alikes, so they all basically sounded the same. And even though the story didn't change significantly when George got involved, There was a lot of additional writing. All the banter system, which was done by John Hancock, who was like our lead AI programmer, and also did a ton of audio work. He came in and said, well, this is, first of all, it's not very, there's not a lot of lightness, and most war movies have some, dark humor, at least. And, you can't really tell them apart, argument was like, well, you made them clones, like, I don't know what we're supposed to do with that. But it was true. He was like, well, you don't have to, you can make them different in some way if you want. And he suggested Robin Williams for one of the voices to make it a little lighter. And we were like, well, we can't afford Robin Williams, but we can take that to heart. And we took that to heart and made it more humorous. I do remember at the time, after we got the feedback, we really pushed back because we were like, wow, because we were very close to ship. This was right after E3. We came out, originally we were going to come out that fall, I think. So this would have been, 2004, maybe June of 2004, July of 2004. We got this feedback and, we were like, well, we're going to have to push it. It will have to be, Christmas or later. It might go into next year, maybe still in the fiscal year, which was the end of March for LucasArts. But that's a big change, right? We have to re-record all of the dialogue. We have to rewrite a lot of the sort of incidental dialogue. we have to do something with these models to differentiate them. Luckily, Jeremy Talbot, who was the technical artist, or one of the technical artists, he kind of came up with the idea of doing these paints, across their faces and things like that to distinguish them. And then we had Mike Stemley come in and do some writing. Also Ryan Kaufman, who had been on Full Throttle 2, as I think the lead writer there, had come in, or maybe the creative director. I can't remember what Ryan's role was. They came in and added a lot of additional dialogue. It was actually really good for the project overall because it gave us more time to also make it more Star Wars-y. We had an offsite around that time, June or July. Darren looked and said, well, we've had to add time to the schedule for these reasons. What else can we do to make the game feel, make the game better? We have an opportunity here to take the game from being, whatever level of game it is, to take it and maybe get 5 points better in reviews or whatever, because we have this extra time. We took a day and just took the whole team away from the computers, away from the distractions of the internet and whatever, and had a bunch of brainstorms, and everybody, it was marketing was there, and QA. I think we had a finance person, and of course everybody who was on the development team. And then we just mixed everybody up, so every group had an engineer and a level designer and, maybe an artist or an animator or both. And all those people kind of talked over, the ways that they saw Star Wars or this game. And it helped a lot. So we got a lot out of that feedback. The feedback led to more time on the project. More time in the project led to a lot of, really good stuff. In particular, the middle levels on I forget the name of the ship, but that middle section where it's kind of a ghost ship became much more Star Wars feeling. It was a little too clean before that, a little too, I don't know. There was something about it. It didn't have enough kind of like weird bits kind of sticking to stuff that Star Wars tends to have. It was more like a cleaner, like Buck Rogers type thing or something. It was not quite the same. Didn't have the right feel.
Well, I liked certainly the level variety there, so I'm there with you. And one thing that I didn't expect at first is that also the band Ash appears in the game, is featured. And how did this collaboration happen? Can you give some details?
Yeah, we were a little surprised by it too. That was given to us more than a decision by the team. That one I think we actually fought against more. And the reason was, it didn't, we had this really adaptive score, that was, really based on, sort of music cues and stingers, and of course we had the whole written music and everything, or the language rather, for the main Ancient Mandalorian or whatever. And so it was kind of a like, and then rock and roll. I mean, some of the reviews even said, well, it has this rock and roll soundtrack. We're like, no, it doesn't. There's like one song in the credits, and now that colored your whole experience of the game. What I suspect happened, I don't have any real knowledge of this, but I believe that for Full Throttle 2, I think had gotten far enough along that they had basically a music deal to license music for that. And when that game fell apart, they probably were like, well, let's take what we've put in and get something appropriate, and we'll make that deal still happen because we've already given you some amount of money or whatever. That's my guess. I think that's how that happened. I don't really know Ash. I mean, I'm sure they're great. But a lot of us were just like, okay, it's very different from the rest of the music of the game. It was very, we had some Williams stuff, had all that kind of classical Star Wars feel, and then this rock and roll song at the end about clones, which was just very strange.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into the band, and it was nice to see them, but it was it really stood out, maybe for not the right reasons.
No.
I think there was a music video clip. I think that was also like, it was mostly marketing, as you basically deals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Still, I don't think it hurt the game too much because it was put at the, in the credits
at the end. Yeah,
but it's true what you said. I mean, then if
this might be the last thing you hear. Yeah, so it is a little strange.
From that.
Yeah. I don't even remember seeing. I don't remember seeing the credits, or that video while we were in development. I might have, but I don't remember it. We were so busy trying to get the game out, and the company was also going through sort of a constriction at that time, getting smaller, to kind of figure out their strategy moving forward and to, save some money while they were doing that. Because I think there were basically a handful of projects. A couple came out that didn't do that well. So they cut some stuff and they kind of resized. And so we were working really, really hard. That was a tough end of project.
Right, I bet. Now, something different, which I don't think it's been discussed that often. So, I've played Spider-Man 2, not the most recent one, the one from 2004.
Yeah.
And so I played it again recently, and I noticed that your name popped up in the credits, in the special thanks from Treyarch. And I was surprised, because I don't think it's common knowledge that you are involved in some form in that influential game. So what's the deal? What was your role there?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have an official role. That's why I'm the special thanks. Because I was still at LucasArts, we were finishing Republic Commando when that game came out. Although it was a game that I would go home after working on Republic Commando late into the night, and sometimes just to wind down, I would just put in Spider-Man 2 and just swing around the city. I mentioned Jamie Fristrom earlier. He was the creative director on Spider-Man 2. And around, 2003 or so, 2003, 2004, he had started a series of articles in Game Developer magazine, and maybe Gama Sutra, the website, was around then as well, and which is now Game Developer, the website. But back then it was that. And he also had a blog. He was one of the first people I knew who had a blog. And that's how I met him. I just met him through the internet. I read his articles. I was also a person who was leading, without really a lot of training, before that. And he was kind of figuring that out for himself. And, especially as a person who had come from engineering, it all kind of made a lot of sense. We had a lot in common. And I remember I would read his blog, and at one point he just posted, "Hey, does anybody want to play chess? I'm trying to learn chess. Do you want to play chess online?" And then, so we ended up playing a handful of games of chess, and we were just sitting there and chatting, as two game programmers, but like as if we were across from a table from one another. We were playing chess, and this would have been in 2003, I think, maybe late in 2003. And he was talking about this problem they were having in Spider-Man 2, which was they were they were having what we would call wall missions, which is like there's a point in a game where you just hit a wall, as a player. A certain number of your players just can't get over this wall. And in this case, it was I assume it's Black Cat that you're chasing through New York, because that's also in the newest, the 2018 Spider-Man. And there was this point where a lot of players just couldn't get past that section, because she was just moving too fast. And I was somebody who paid a lot of attention to difficulty in games at that point, because I knew which games I liked and which games I didn't like that managed difficulty in different ways. And I told him that if the player failed a few times, they should just slow Black Cat down. That nobody would know. You'd think you were getting better, that you were just getting better at it and faster. And he was like, that might work. And that's what they did, and that's how that game shipped. That if you fail a few times in these sort of race sections, which are not the bread and butter of the game. Most of the game is not like that, right? And it's one of the things we talk about on the podcast all the time, is that if you have something that is different from your main play, you have to make it easy. And you might think you've made it easy enough, but you haven't. You need to make it easier than that. And this was a way for them to start out, for people who are really good at the web slinging or whatever, to have the challenge, but for people who were not good at it to have a fallback. And the fallback was, well, if we notice that you're having a hard time, we'll just make it a little easier and keep making it easier. I think I had gotten the idea from Sly Cooper, which had some ways to make it easier for you if you failed a lot. A lot of story games have, that have physical, or player skill. Will do that. They will have some way of making the game easier if you get stuck. Literally being able to change the difficulties, directly, or just little helping hands. And so that's what they did. And at the end of the game, when they had shipped, I didn't know for years actually that he had put me in the credits, because I didn't watch the credits because I was busy finishing a game. I remember my dad asked me once, he said, "Hey, you're in the Spider-Man games credits, it says online." And I was like, "Oh, that's really funny. Jamie wants to put me in there." And I asked Jamie about it, and he said, "Well, I couldn't give you cash, so I gave you credit." So that is where that came from.
Nice, really nice story. And and it's great, really a great idea, the dynamic difficulty, it doesn't make you feel, like dumb in a way, like you suck, you're sure you don't want to lower the difficulty. That makes you feel so badly.
Yeah. I don't like it when games do that, because I'm the same way, where I'm like, no, I'm gonna beat this now you're making me angry, right? Of course that makes you worse at the game. This was a way to just kind of do it gently. You would never know it. I don't even know if they've ever really talked about that publicly. I know there are other games that do this. I mean, Resident Evil 4 famously has dynamic difficulty that nobody talked about for years and years. But so that's just the thing that people will do sometimes. And it just worked out really, really well for him. And it was just an offhand comment I made. I was like, "Oh, have you considered trying this? Or consider trying that?" And they ended up going with that solution.
Right. And speaking of Spider-Man, are you a fan of the character, or Marvel, or comics in general, even DC or whatever? Did you manage to play any of the newer Spider-Man games?
I'm actually playing Spider-Man 2018 right now, because we played Arkham Asylum on the podcast recently, and I replayed Arkham City, and I played Arkham Origins for the first time, and I was like, well, I want something else, and that sometimes happens when we play games on the podcast, that I end up playing games like it for a while, and this time I've kind of gone to Spider-Man. I'm not, specifically a comics guy. I really like Insomniac games, to be honest. Ever since Spyro, I think Spyro 3 was the first one I ever played by them, and I'm a huge Ratchet & Clank fan. Not because of any sort of comic aspect, but I just really like the feel of their action adventure games. I've even played their Resistance series, which is the first-person games. The first one, I think, is my favorite of those, though each of them has things that I like. Anyway, I picked this up, several years ago, and I'm finally getting around to playing it. I do like Spider-Man. I mean, of the characters, in the sort of comics universes, he's probably one of my favorite. Because he's just a kid trying to figure things out, and he feels grounded in some ways, in the sense of like, well, he's got, he's making no money because he's, working a photography job, at least in the comics when I was growing up. I also had an uncle who really liked Spider-Man, so it's just kind of something that I've always been a fan of. In general, I'm not a huge comic book person, but I watched a lot of the Marvel Cinematic movies because I have my sons were of the right age. They really wanted to see those movies, so we'd go see them, and then they grew out of going to movies with me, and so I stopped seeing them. So I kind of I can kind of take or leave the superheroes, but I do enjoy flying around the city. So, and I have liked it since Spider-Man 2.
Makes sense. And so I'd say let's leave the past in the past where it belongs right now, because I'd like to discuss a little bit more of the present. So you now work at Twin Suns Corp as
Yes.
a technical director.
Yes.
What does a technical director do? What's your day-to-day job?
I set all technical strategy for the company. I can't really go into the details of what that involves, because we haven't announced what we're working on or anything like that. But it does mean sort of figuring out what we need to tackle when, and what we can leave be, and just figuring out those things. We're a pretty small studio, so there's not a lot of extra bandwidth on top of that, because I was leading the engineering team as well. I do have a lead who works for me, and who handles a lot of the stuff that I would have normally handled as a lead in the past. But the team's small enough, that I can still touch in with everybody every week, and it's part of the strategy. So it's a day to day. I'm keeping the train on the tracks a lot of the time. I'm running down crashes or obscure bugs. Some days I'm implementing features. Some days, I work on the UI. Like I work on all kinds of things. I'm sort of a utility player in that way. Having started in gameplay, I sort of am strongest in that. Although I'm good with system stuff as well. The one thing I'm weakest at this point is graphics, just because it's been so long. I actually, in my graduate program, was working on graphics, but there was basically very little hardware at that time. So things have really changed. Now graphics is a huge specialty, and so I kind of oversee, everything. But I have somebody for graphics because I'm very happy to talk over things with him, and he explains it to me very well, what's going on. And I do know enough about it that I can talk about it. But it would be hard for me to jump in and do. So.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of my thing. It's there's overall project direction with the rest of my co-directors. So we have meetings about that. But generally it's just setting the technical direction for the team.
Okay. So speaking of the team, I could say that there are so many experienced people coming from all over the world, basically, and worked on so many of the great video games of our time. Check out the website, guys. Some of these games like Halo, Hitman. And so what's it like having such an experienced group of individuals to make game with?
It's really great. You can, it's a lot of these people I've worked with in the past. Many of the directors are people I've worked with, since my LucasArts days, back to StarFighter. There was a person, Tim, all the games I shipped at LucasArts, I worked on with Tim, who was the, both the CEO and the chief creative officer, sort of creative director. But our design director is Harley Baldwin White Widow, who worked on StarFighter. Troy Mashburn is a lead designer under her. We worked on all 4 games, even the game Full Throttle 2 that didn't ship. We worked on all 4 of the games I worked on at LucasArts together. So I basically worked with Troy, every day for 7 years. So one of the things that's really great about that is, back then we trusted each other because we could see how hard we were all working, and we were communicating constantly, and figuring out what needs to be done next, and helping each other figure things out, showing each other games that did, this, that, or the other thing. Nowadays, working with some of these people again, or with new people of the same caliber, there's a lot of just pure trust that I don't need to worry about certain things that I might have worried about in the past. And, I know that those people have it, and they've got it. We're all super senior, in that regard, especially in the, sort of the director level. That's where I probably learn the most, but it's still, you're always still invigorated by the young people you bring in, which is another reason why I love working in games. There's always young people coming in, bringing energy to the games. But yeah, I think that's the big change. back then, I was kind of a nervous wreck trying to figure out everything that, had to fit into the game. Anything that moved on StarFighter, was moving because I either wrote the flight model, or I made the weapons move, or I made the AI figure out where it wanted to fly. I did a lot of UI work. These days it's more, I trust that I can build something and let them figure out, and it's just kind of, they're going to do their magic, we're going to do our magic, and we're going to have a big magic show at the end. And we really rely on each other, and know we've got each other's backs. I think that's, it's pretty unusual to have like a 15-year gap between working with people and then get a chance to work with them again. And that just doesn't really happen in the games industry. You might stay at a place for a long time, and then you work with people, the same for a long time. But to actually start out together and then kind of go off and learn a bunch of things from studios all around the world, and then come back together. We've all come back, we're kind of a super group at that point, just like these people with all this experience from all over. So it's really, really, it's really a pleasure.
You mean probably in a figurative sense coming together, because this is a fully remote company.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, and this is, I personally work from home, so it's a huge point for me. I love this thing about Twin Suns Corp, because especially with the recent success of Spider-Man 2, I think it was confirmed that they worked fully remote. They gave the option to work fully remote. So what I'd like to ask is, how do you think remote work impacts on the job of the developer? Because there are so many detractors for this kind of things, which to me is the way of the future when it is applicable.
Yeah, I was concerned back. Well, not so much that I was concerned. Back in 2006 or 7 or something, I was doing some contracting, so I was working remote. And at the time, I remember potential clients being concerned that I wasn't going to be there in the room. I was here in the East Coast of the United States. Most of my clients were on the West Coast of the United States, but not in the same state I was, for sure, even if they were, closer to here. And I remember that being a real concern, that you wouldn't be in the room, you wouldn't be there to collaborate closely with folks. And it might have been true back then that would have been harder, because there was video conferencing, but it was usually like in a room, a special room in your building that was specially wired, for telecommunications, teleconferencing, whatever. So you couldn't just call somebody on the, and be able to see them, on your desktop. And there might have been some, but it really was not common, and there wasn't a lot of broadband to homes either. So that was just kind of coming along. I guess cable modem was kind of a thing at that point. But the infrastructure wasn't really there to support. So maybe the concerns were valid, and maybe they weren't. It's hard to say. These days, I don't really think there's any reason to have to work in the same place. I have not actually met in person any of the people who work for me. They're all fully remote. 2 of them are in Singapore. 1 is in Poland. 1 is actually not that far from here, maybe 4 hours drive, 3-4 hours drive. But I haven't met him in person yet either. So it's fully possible, and of course we support a huge team of animators and artists and designers that also have never been in the same place, audio people as well, in most cases. So it's very doable. It's not there. That has not really been a huge barrier. We did spend some time trying to figure it out. I think the biggest hurdle for us has really honestly been IT, which is a big pain in the neck, honestly. It's just, I frequently will have somebody ask me something, and they'll share their screen, but if they have a problem with their BIOS or, they're having some low level problem or they blue screen or something like that, like I can't look at their blue screen. So some of the trickier hardware problems we've had have just been like, I don't know, ship them a new machine, or ship them a new graphics card, or, if in some cases the hardware is still protected by warranty or whatever, ship it back to the manufacturer. But it's nothing like just going over to somebody's machine and just like, I'm going to type a few things. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. I'm going to scan your disk. I'm going to do that or whatever. Just all these sort of hardware things I've picked up over the years. That's probably the thing that I find the hardest thing to do. A lot of IT falls on me and on somebody in Singapore, Ian Pang, who's our Singapore studio director. But also all the engineers get some IT because of that. So yeah, that's probably the thing that's the biggest headache. The other thing we really had to learn was how to communicate asynchronously, so out of step, because we might have somebody who's on the East Coast, where we are currently 13 hours difference from Singapore. Right now we're recording this at 3:30 or so my time. That is 4:30 in the morning for Singapore. So by the time I'm going to the bed, they're just starting work, or when I'm done for the day anyway, they aren't starting work yet. So I do have some times in the week when I stay, later, or I come down to my computer later at night just to catch up with them, or get in early to catch up with them. But in general, we've just really learned to rely on the tools of the age. Slack, we use Zoom, of course, a ton. We record all of our meetings, and producers take notes of the important sort of decisions or things that happen to those meetings to help facilitate. And then if somebody has a question, they can watch the video, get to that part of the video, they can ask a question, get an answer, later, at some point later. It does mean, we're often working on multiple things, at a time as individuals, because we might be waiting for, somebody else. So there's probably a little, factor of overhead in that. But in general, I'd say we're extremely efficient and productive. Part of that is that we are mostly pretty senior people. So there's that too. I think it probably would be trickier if I had a lot of very junior people working for me. And I know that when, sometimes when the more junior people have joined the staff, I spend a lot of time with them initially. So it can be costly in that way. But in general, no. I mean, in general, I would probably be doing that if they were in the same place. It just would be, in their cubicle or in their office, in my office, whatever. So I haven't really missed it. I think the other thing to watch out for people who work remote is not to work all the time. I'm lucky enough that I have a separate space. This is my workspace down here. This is a furnished area of my basement, which is my office. And then, I can get away from work just by going upstairs, and it's separate. And that I think is very healthy. And I think that's a tricky thing for people to figure out too. But in general, we're pretty lucky that way. So
yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. Look, I have prepared so many more questions for you, but I think we are running off the clock. So just very few closing questions.
Sure.
What advices can you give to young developers starting now?
There's never been an easier time to make games. If you're in engineering, there's a ton of stuff that you can learn from. I mean, you can download the source to, a number of engines, and just look at it. If you're not interested in sort of the low level of tech, you can work very quickly in a number of engines as well. I mean, there's different engines for different things. There's certainly something, like Unreal or Unity, although they've been having some troubles lately, figuring out what their business is going to be. But there's lots of others. That's just the beginning. And, you can just jump in and start making things. In fact, back when I was getting into the industry, there were no programs in schools. I of course didn't have a undergraduate background in game development or anything like that. That wasn't a thing. That wasn't a thing I could have done. In fact, all of my computer science was very academic. It was not very practical. I learned way more in the first 6 months working at LucasArts than I had learned in several years in terms of building programs, at LucasArts. But you can do all of that online now, and I think the key thing is to figure out how you learn best, and to make things, and fail, make things that don't work out, there's the old adage about like learning how to, throw clay pots or something like that, where it's like the master potter takes half the class and says, all right, I want all of you to make one pot that's going to be your final exam, and all of you to make as many pots as you can, and that will be your final grade will be based on how many. So, and the people who make one learn way less than the people who make many, many, many. I remember hearing from, I think when we interviewed John Romero, that he's written hundreds of games. He's still writing games all the time, little games. I think Romero was on like his 12th or 13th engine or something like that when he came out with Doom, or something like that. So it's, if you're in my, discipline, just go out there and code, part of something. You can also mod, that's a great thing. There's a modding community. There's always been kind of a modding community since things like Doom, where you can make levels. But now you can just mod, you can mod scripts, so if you want to do design and things like that, there's all kinds of ways to mod in art as well. If you want to see things, in games that exist, you can make your own art. But whatever you do a lot of it. Do it quickly, fail fast, learn from your failure, and move on.
Right. Really nice. And can you tell us a curious fact, anecdote, funny fact about the development of one of your games? Something that you didn't tell anybody else yet.
You asked me this, and I had an idea, and now I'm trying to remember what it was. So I apologize. I should have written it down, because I'm terrible at thinking of these things. There's definitely, there's always things that you cut from games. So now I'll just think of something from, I don't know, Republic Commando, that are always kind of surprising. I guess I can talk about a couple sort of LucasArts development things. But we had this idea for a rancor-like creature for Kashyyyk, or Kashyyyk, or however that's pronounced, the Wookiee planet. And the idea was it would be this big beast that kind of came up out of the ground. It was kind of a boss monster, but it wasn't a game that really had any boss fights, and everything that we made for the game was very, like an AI that you could drop into any environment. We might have to do something in the environment so it knows how to get around, but you could basically drop it in. And we didn't have a lot of things that were like, you do it once, so we had this one thing that was going to have all these physics attacks. And so we looked at that, and we looked at our schedule, and we said, we could spend 6 weeks on this. It might still not be fun, and we'd end up cutting it anyway. It'd be better to cut it now. So that's a thing too. Star Wars Republic Commando almost had co-op. It was planned to have co-op. I cut that from that game because there was no way we could have a good co-op experience. I don't think that's necessarily news, but it's definitely something I've done, and I've been getting a hard time about it from Tim Longo ever since. And then, one thing that I did early on that I probably would not do again is that this is one of those things you have to learn while you're making things. I don't know, maybe I would do it again. I have to think about it. But the ships in StarFighter, all of them fly the game the same way the player does, in the sense that they send inputs down to the flight model like it's a joystick, or twin sticks in the case of a PlayStation controller. And what that meant was, all the originally the game started as a roll and pull flight model. So, roll the plane, pull back to get to actually turn. It became more arcadey, but all the AIs still fly the ships the original way. So if you play that game, you're sort of flying this way, while they're kind of flying, and they'll bank and turn this way, and so you're always seeing sort of the top or bottom of the ship as they kind of fly away from you, which ended up working out pretty well from that respect. But it was because they flew the game like a pilot would with an actual virtual stick. So those are a few things I can sort of think of off the top of my head.
I definitely didn't know them, so thank you very much for sharing these. And now I'd say, before we conclude, one last question, which not really a question, it's more like a space for you to simply say anything you feel like to our viewers.
Sure. Go out there and enjoy things. People ask me all the time, like, well, how do I get into games? Do I learn this language or that language or whatever? And for video games, game development, sort of at my scale, AAA scale, most of my career, the thing I recommend is learning, I usually say English, but whatever language you're going to work with people in, because it's more important to be able to communicate with people than it is to know everything about, I don't know, C++ or whatever. I don't know everything about C++ anymore because C++ keeps changing. So there's definitely things that I'm like, okay, well, I see this code, I don't understand it. I have to go read and figure out what it's about. But every day I have to talk with somebody, either through writing in Slack, in a voice recording like this, a video recording, or an email or what have you. And it's way more important to be able to communicate with them in that way. And most of my success in my career has come from that. So, early on, I worked with designers, and it was because I could sit down and talk with a designer and understand what they needed that I could be a good engineer for them, and could really represent their needs. If they were just kind of throwing specs at me, first of all, usually when you get a spec, they try to solve the problem for you, and that's no fun, because then what are you going to do? You're just writing some code. But also it's usually wrong, in some way. It's not the most efficient way to do things. It might be more than they actually need, or whatever. But if you actually sit down and talk with people and understand their needs, that's way more important than being the most proficient coder in the world. I'm probably not the best coder on my team. I'm pretty good. But I'm really effective as a programmer because I'm really effective as a communicator. So I highly encourage for people who want to do the sort of work that I do, that they really invest in that.
Thank you so much. And that really wraps it up. I want to thank again Brett for accepting my invitation. What a great pleasure is to have you here. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed our chat, your very candid answers. It really made me a happy man. That's what I mean.
Well, I'm glad.
So, guys, once again, check out his podcast at Dev Game Club. It's really super interesting. Also, check out his personal YouTube channel. All the links I will put in the
Don't bother with YouTube; it's so old.
All right, it
but
is.
Check out the podcast. We do way more talking.
I really enjoyed your playthrough of Republic Commando. That was really fun.
Yeah, that's fun.
So, and of course, guys, keep playing all these awesome games he worked on. They made history, and I'm glad that Brad took to be with us today, sharing that history. So, really, thank you again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And guys, before you go, just a reminder to like, subscribe, do all the yada yada. This way I can bring you more content, better content, just like this interview here. And you will be up to speed with my latest videos. So it's a win-win, it's free. Hit the subscribe button. But really, I just want to thank you so much for sticking to the end of this video. I will be seeing you in my next one, but until then, stay safe, play safe, world gamers.